some of the major stories that are making the headlines across Africa. And now the United Nations says its partnership with the African Union is stronger than ever. The Secretary General of the world's largest intergovernmental organization, Antonio Guterres, was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for the 39th African Union Summit in a move to solidarize with the governments and people of Africa for their global leadership in that struggle for justice and equality. Well, this year, the continental body AU says it is focused on ensuring sustainable water availability and also safe sanitation systems, which are in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Well, in his remarks at a press briefing, the Secretary General of the United Nations says the AU and the UN have turned many shared principles into frameworks that would deliver sustainable development.
Carry with me my deepest gratitude to the governments and people of Africa for their global leadership in the struggle for justice and equality, and my deepest conviction in the enduring power and promise of Africa. And that conviction is reflected in concrete actions. The United Nations African Union partnership is stronger than ever. Over the last decades, we have turned shared principles into joint frameworks on peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. And that work continues. I spoke to the summit on three priorities. First, peace and security. Many parts of the continent face deep, complex crises, including Sudan, DRC, the Sahel, and the Horn of Africa.
Well, so let's have a breakdown of some of these priority areas. Joining us now is Niloy Banerjee, resident representative of the United Nations Development Programme, Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us, Niloy. And I must say that I'm just returning from Ethiopia myself. I haven't seen the UN Secretary General appear there. Was that intentional as part of moves by the United Nations just to show the kind of support that you have for the continent? Is that the move?
Absolutely. That is. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Absolutely. That is, the UN has stood behind the African Union for the longest time, but also the shared principles have been a big binding factor. The leaders of Africa, many of them have grown up with some of our founding leaders in the United Nations, not least Ghana's own son, Kofi Annan. So there has been a very healthy sharing and melding of minds between the UN and the African Union, and our leaderships have always believed in the same values and have tried to move those agendas forward from their respective.
And I believe that's what we witnessed at the just ended summit. But I want us to dig in because if you look at the African continent, we're working with an Agenda 2063. Right. Then you have the Sustainable Development Goals working with Agenda 2030.
That's right.
Are they aligned?
They are. They're aligned in spirit and they're aligned in content. Now, timelines vary, obviously. And I think it's wise because Africa needed to give itself more of a runway than we had assumed for the rest of the world. But now as we are coming towards the end of the deadline, we are also realizing that the rest of the world also needs some runway to readjust the goals to the new shifted realities of what we see in the world now. So I think they're aligned. If you see the principles of the African Union, the 7 big pillars on which the African Union philosophy is built, they're all aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Poverty, human rights, safety and security, peace. So the alignment is there. The alignment is there, both in spirit and content.
I want us to touch on what the theme is for the continent this year, which is obviously on ensuring access to sustainable water. There's sanitation a bit in there as well. We understand from the data that over 400 million plus individuals across the continent lack access to potable water. How much of a challenge is it for the United Nations Development Programme?
UNDP has a broad mandate at the level of planning, financing, working with modern technology, if you like, to address these issues which are fundamental on a day-to-day basis. So it's our work is segmented into two. One is on-the-ground work, like better water management, better watershed harvesting, managing the predictability of rainfall, for example, and the possibility of flooding using high-tech, digital, AI modeling, etc. But we also have a policy component to this work, water governance, the regulatory frameworks, how to price water right in a way that it's affordable to our citizens, but also allows our utilities to function properly. So these two, work on the ground and work at the policy and regulatory level, this is where the UNDP work comes together at a very fundamental pressure point, if you like, to make this change. So we welcome very much the declaration of the year. And we certainly think that this is much needed at this time in Africa. And in Ghana also, we are now seeing that we need to manage our water resources, particularly our fresh water, very, very carefully.
We'll talk about the national level priorities and how, of course, the UNDP is supporting in that regard. But what's frightening to someone like me listening to the Secretary General is the aspect of knowing that the targets will be receding in the next 4 years or so. And yet many more African countries are struggling with issues of inequality. Will Africa ever meet that target?
Well, it's not for lack of agency, not for lack of wanting to be there. We do have challenges, there's no doubt about that. There's investment into Africa needs to step up significantly. The direction of travel is right. There are many well-intentioned governments. We also have to watch against the drags, the peace and security situation in the region, in the continent. So if you take it as a sum total, there's a lot of room for hope. But hope is not a strategy, as you're pointing out. Hope is not a strategy. So we've got to also then revisit where we've made, if not wrong assumptions, where our assumptions did not hold up. And therefore, what do we need to change? And what are the incentives and frameworks that we need to put in place where we can revisit our assumptions and sort of recommit to a different trajectory of growth and development that's inclusive, that's planet-friendly, which manages our water resources, and which leaves something for the future, but at the same time creates growth and jobs and opportunities.
At the national level, how are you working with the government of Ghana to at least advance our course? If we're not doing it continentally, everyone should start from the state level too as well.
Sure. With Ghana, we have a long-standing partnership right since independence. So UNDP's work spans 3 or 4 broad areas. Just clubbing them together, but using sort of aggregative words. The poverty and inclusive prosperity and reduction of inequality, jobs, employment agenda. That's one big bucket. A second bucket has to do with climate change, energy transition, protection of biodiversity. And a third bucket, if you like, has to do with peace and security, governance, political stability, strengthening institutions. So these are the main, but then we also work on sort of not the game changers, but the multipliers, the drivers, the digital transformation, use of AI, women's empowerment agenda, and of course, to finance all of this, the whole financing agenda. How do we get the wherewithal to run this ambitious agenda?
So these are your areas, but I was just tying that into the aspect about the priorities in terms of water, sanitation as well at the national level, because there are some issues of concern for you, which you were raising earlier.
Yeah, the issues of concern are frankly management of freshwater resources. Ghana has fortunately abundant freshwater, but unless it's managed well, we could run into a serious crisis situation. One of the issues is, of course, mining-related pollution of freshwater resources, illegal mining, I may point out. But also generally how we manage our groundwater because of deforestation, because of loss of traditional systems of managing water. But also with climate change and more severe water events, if you like, meaning flooding and cloudbursts, there is a need to bring all of this together into a more comprehensive water management framework. So UNDP's work, like I said, there's a component of working on the ground, but the work on the ground feeds what we bring to the policy table, with suggestions about what we are learning from the ground, but also what we're learning from our other offices around the world where UNDP has programs, which is about 170. So,
Ghana is known as the beacon of democracy. At least we've been basking in that for quite some time now. Yet we're now in a tough neighborhood looking at what's been happening around the West Africa sub-region. We're becoming the epicenter for terrorism and also the issues of unconstitutional changes in government. How much of a worry is it to you, knowing that you've worked all these years to promote peace, security, and democratic development?
So, well, that label is well deserved. Right. Ghana has been a beacon of stability and thriving democracy, if you like. And the second characterization that you make, that it's living in a turbulent neighborhood.
Right.
That said, what gives me hope is that I see great awareness of this in the government of Ghana, among the people of Ghana, civil society, the media. You're raising these issues regularly, which then is translating back into a very coherent policy of, look, all this good work we are doing in the economy has rebounded reasonably well from the COVID shock. All this work we are doing in the digital transformation in Ghana, all of this could be appended if the peace and security could not be held up. So that's I feel at the political level, civil society, international organizations, that consensus exists. Then there are particular issues. First, for instance, cross-border, because our borders are porous, our people are used to moving around and doing trade across borders. Cross-border exportation of arms, but also generally radical elements and violence. So UNDP is working quite hands-on with the government of the country on a series of these programs which involve the Gulf of Guinea initiative, which involve an Atlantic Corridor initiative with 4 other countries in the region, which involve a peace-building facility initiative, which is really working with local communities to strengthen livelihoods and possibilities for entrepreneurship, which are very big antidotes to radicalization and people feeling uncomfortable. And also we are part of the peace process in parts of the country. We are also bringing a level of community dialogue and mediation. And finally also some rapprochement between the security forces and local communities. So it's a whole bouquet of initiatives that come together on the peace and security agenda, and working very closely with the peace architecture of the government and civil society.
And I don't know if you've heard of the latest, where, of course, there was an attack on some traders, just as you were pointing out, people moving into Burkina Faso, just as we've heard, unfortunately, they were attacked by violent extremists. That's the sort of threat that relatively stable democracies such as Ghana are now facing. Looking at the recent incident that I was just pointing to, for instance, what do you propose that a country, a relatively stable democracy such as Ghana, could be doing to consolidate its democratic gains?
Yeah, first, I'm sorry for the people of Ghana and for the families for this loss, and that it has to come to this tragedy. Plus, in our work, what we learn is the greatest contestations are for resources, or when I feel you're taking away something from me. So resources, food, all of these are becoming contested areas because somebody has a scarcity and somebody else seems to be taking it away, which is not always true. A trader is there to buy commodities and pay for it and bring it back fair and square, which benefits everybody. Now that narrative sometimes gets hijacked by these contravening narratives of radicalization. Oh, something is taken away. In Ghana, what we are doing really is therefore going to the root cause The root cause, I mean, for UNDP, this is the root cause. If you build prosperity, if you build opportunity, if people can see jobs and the possibility of commerce and the possibility of the hope, the optimism of that someday my life will be better, I think these contestations can be managed. So a two-pronged strategy, which is what I'm seeing in UNDP programs, but also taking inspiration from the government's programs, a very strict prevention at the borders, at the small pockets of conflict that are flaring up in different parts of the country, and a very strong focus on livelihoods, jobs, opportunities, connecting young people to the opportunities of the digital and AI world and all of that.
Do you feel, is that your diagnosis of why there's so much increase in violent extremism across the sub-region?
That would be a very broad generalization, but yes, the causality is clear. People are feeling a lack of hope. People are feeling a lack of opportunity. People are feeling that others are doing better and we are falling behind. That creates that sense of angst, which is very good fuel for radicalization or jihadis or you name it. Any sort of subversive spirit to rise and to forget our greater humanity and greater good.
Yeah. Just last month, President John Dramani Mahama, assembled other West African leaders here in Accra at a high-level forum, consultative forum, largely it was, just to dialogue on some of these pressing challenges. Is that the sole way of tackling this problem, or there are some other factors that we ought to consider where UNDP, for instance, was making available its expertise and recommendations in that regard?
It's not the sole way, blessed, but there is a very big component in that we have to recognize. No country can remain an island. Not an island of peace and stability, not an island of immense prosperity. Let's say Ghana became immensely prosperous tomorrow. We would have to rise with the region. Otherwise, the rest of the region will constantly be knocking at our door to bring some disturbance, as we are seeing with, for instance, global migration trends. Why are people migrating more than ever before, taking immense risks to life and limb? It's because there's a feeling of despair. There's a feeling of lack of hope. If so, then we can't do it as a sole country. We cannot do it as a sole organization. This is a regional, sub-regional, regional, and indeed continental effort to build peace and stability and build opportunities for particularly for young people and other vulnerable groups, like women are falling behind, for example, in the whole opportunity space. Yeah. And so all the new tools and abilities that we have at our disposal, we also have to be careful that we don't build a new divide, the digital divide or the AI divide. That's also of concern to UNDP. So, look, the regional approach, I think, is necessary. No country can do this in an insular, we'll shut off our doors and raise high walls. That's not going to happen.
It's very early in the year, which means that you have a whole plan for the year and some of the key priority areas for you. What are we to expect from the UNDP in terms of some of the programs that you expect to roll out that will augment perhaps what the government of Ghana has been doing?
Yeah. On the peace and security agenda, we are working with the government, actually directly with the President's office, on the national security framework, which has a big component of peace. Yeah. But as I said, there's a whole bouquet of initiatives under that. That would be clearly a flagship initiative. On the green agenda, if you like, the whole energy transition package, a big look at climate change, but how to convert that into also some sort of a carbon market, a carbon financing mechanism, and get Ghana into the game in a big way. Tied to that, the issue of commodities management, because Ghana is rich in commodities, in gold, in cocoa, better commodities management, including those that are still under the ground and could potentially be game changers. Good management of rare earth minerals and all the rest of it. And then a third focus, very strong focus on particularly women and youth-led business opportunities, small and medium enterprises, startups, and things that create jobs, create prosperity.
Yeah.
So not all the expectation is that government will create jobs, government will give us prosperity. It also brings out the agency of people. And so these three sort of big, broad areas.
I thought that would have been the last, but President John Mahama has also been concerned about official development assistance, the fact that aid is not flowing as it should or used to. What's the alternative, or your outlook on how ODA will flow to countries such as Ghana?
The whole ODA paradigm is under assault. There's no doubt about that. That said, I don't think it's the end of global solidarity. There is always going to be a component of what we call development cooperation. But you know, the ultimately where we will win is if we are able to create our own resources, our own fuel for driving our growth, for managing our planet, for managing our peace and security architecture. That's one. Two, globally, I think one big area where we haven't made a very good connection, because again, what I started out at the beginning, that some of our assumptions were false, is how do we work better with the private sector? Because there is money out in the world. Overnight, billions of dollars are spent to take over one company or another. A bank is failing, and overnight billions appear to shore up that bank. I'm not going to name names on air, but so it's not a lack of resources. It's how decisions are made on those resources. What are the compulsions of the people who make decisions on those resources? And we haven't plugged in quite enough to that to understand how the private sector or the financial sector or investment funds, what are their compulsions? What bottom lines do they have to manage before they can bring money to the bigger global humanitarian and development agenda? But if we keep the dialogue up, if we try to understand where the holders of resources, where their pain points are, and if we can manage to create a narrative, an offer that is co-created together, I think it's not a lack of resources.
Yeah.
So I'm not so worried about a decline in ODA, and which may be temporary, you never know. Yeah. It also has to do with political cycles.
We can only remain hopeful.
Yes.
Grateful for your time. Niloy Banerjee, thanks for joining us. And of course, this is just the start of the conversation. I'm sure in subsequent times as well, we'll have you around again to talk about some of these issues. Thank you for spending time with us. Still to come, we'll talk about this development in Nigeria and what the US government is doing there. We'll be right back. Please stay.